So in today's video, I'm talking about the road to codependency recovery, 5 steps to healing codependent relationships. So in this video, we're going to talk about what is codependency, what are those core areas you need to address, and what are the 5 steps to recover. But if you're new, my name's Michelle Ferris, I'm a psychotherapist, and I love helping people create relationships that work. So what is codependency? Codependency is basically a relationship pattern where you hyper-focus on other people and lose yourself in the process. You help, rescue, even control other people because your self-worth is wrapped up in relationship, which really impacts your ability to trust and love yourself because you're constantly looking for it in other people. Some core areas of codependency are difficulty setting boundaries. Boundaries are difficult for people who are codependent because we really want to please other people rather than take care of ourselves. So saying no feels really scary. We assume that saying no is going to make us look selfish, so we avoid it. Another core area of codependency is over-functioning in our relationships. You do 150% while the other person doesn't do a lot. And we do that because giving, rescuing, helping others becomes part of who we are. And over-functioning isn't just about doing more for the other person. It can also mean doing more at work, where people ask you to do things and you never say no. So your workload is 10 times what other people's is. Or at church, you're the one that volunteers for everything. So you take the responsibility. If you have a volunteer position, you do more than what's being asked. And the problem with that is that it often leads to feeling anxious and overwhelmed because we're not meant to overfunction and go 150 miles an hour. Another sign of codependency is depending too much on others for our value and our self-worth. You may not feel complete unless you're in a romantic relationship. Or you may put all of your emotional eggs into your best friend's basket. Or you may rely too much on your adult child. Because when you're codependent, you don't have a strong sense of self. You look to others to complete you. I know for me, I did this for many years. And I did it mostly with girlfriends because I wanted that connection so badly. But I didn't know how to connect to myself, and that's what we're going to talk about later when we talk about codependency recovery. Another core sign of codependency is dismissing your needs for the sake of pleasing others. Because when you're codependent, you're really good at knowing what other people need, but because of that hyper-focus, you're not really good at what you need because you're not paying attention. You're outwardly focused. So in codependency, we always are looking for ways to find our value by helping, rescuing, even controlling people, places, and things so that we can get the recognition we never got as kids. But things like self-care, receiving compliments, getting recognition can feel really uncomfortable because when you grow up codependent, you don't get that love and affection and recognition that you crave as a child. So in adulthood, any form of recognition, even a simple compliment, can feel really uncomfortable because codependent people are really good at loving, but they don't know how to receive love in the same way because often we feel unlovable in our relationships. If you relate to this at all, say me too in the comments. I'm right there with you. This video is going to help. So another core sign of codependency is attracting people who are emotionally unavailable or have narcissistic tendencies because most codependent people lack a sense of self, but narcissists have too much of a self. So we end up attracting our opposite. You may be in a relationship with a narcissist that gaslights you a lot and blames you for the relationship not working. Or maybe you're in a relationship with an alcoholic who you enable because you don't know another way to love them and you can't let go. Or maybe you're in a toxic relationship that you just can't let go of because that fear of being left alone and abandoned is too much for you. You also may attract somebody who just has a lot of problems, so they become your project, somebody you can fix and help because you see the potential in that person. But really, there's warning signs that are telling you that that's not really who they are today. But that's when, in our codependency, we feel like the superhero. We feel like we can help and rescue and change the outcome, when really that ends up coming back to bite us. So how do you know if you're codependent? You know when you're codependent when your relationships are one-sided and even toxic. because you're so focused on getting the love you need from other people because you don't know how to give it to yourself. Now, here's another quick tip. If you give and you're resentful on the back end, that tells me that you're most likely struggling with codependency. You're not giving freely, and you may even be giving too much because that's part of the overfunctioning pattern that we have in codependency. So let's talk about the recovery process. What is codependency recovery? Codependency recovery is basically the process of learning how to create healthy, mutually satisfying relationships without sacrificing yourself. The goal in recovery is to strive for a healthy balance between giving and receiving, because most people who are codependent have a really hard time receiving because there's usually some childhood pain around that. So let's talk about the 5 steps in the recovery process for healing your codependent relationship. The first thing is you have to befriend yourself. This includes identifying what you need. This may take some time, and start even prioritizing some forms of self-care. Like, are you taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually? Because when we don't do that, we're at risk for developing unhealthy dependencies. So part of the recovery process is to shift that focus from taking care of others to taking better care of ourselves. Now, I know that can be really hard, but here's a quick tip. If you learn how to take better care of yourself, you're actually going to be able to give more freely and even more in your relationship. For me, that was a huge aha, because as a codependent, I really enjoy giving, but I had to learn how to give without resentment, because that was really hurting my relationships. The next step in codependency recovery is developing self-trust. Because most codependent people growing up did not get their thoughts and feelings validated by any adult. So we learn not to trust ourselves, especially in dysfunctional families where parents tend to deny the reality of what's happening. If there's any alcoholism or abuse or other dysfunctional behaviors, if the parents can't acknowledge what's really happening, the child learns to doubt themselves, because the child sees what's happening, but they need that validation of their own experience. So developing self-trust is a huge piece in codependency recovery. The next step in your codependency recovery is assessing your relationships. This is huge because the codependent person does not want to let go. We want to preserve our relationships no matter what. And usually that means we even get into recovery in hopes of fixing the relationship. But the problem is we have to assess it first. Because while I really believe there are things we can do in our recovery to better our relationships, we have to first assess how healthy they are. Because some people, no matter what we do, are not going to change their behavior, especially with narcissists or alcoholics who are actively drinking. They're most likely not going to be able to change their behavior in any way. But assessing the health of that relationship is key, and that's where my checklists come in handy, because there's a process you can do to look at what's working, what isn't working in your own relationship behavior, because all of those are going to help you assess how healthy your relationships are. And if they're not healthy or they're even toxic, you may need to start practicing detachment and better boundaries. Which leads to the next step in codependency recovery, is learn how to set boundaries. Because boundaries help you advocate for yourself. They determine what you're going to do and when you're going to remove yourself. They're not about getting the other person to change. So part of recovery is figuring out what are your boundaries. And I did another video on how you can use your feelings and your values to determine your boundaries. Because boundaries are what is going to protect you and keep your relationships healthy. Now, the last step in codependency recovery is working through family of origin issues. This one takes a while, and I don't recommend starting with this one unless you're highly motivated and you're already dealing with those issues. Because most of the time this means uncovering issues of abuse and looking at how the codependency started. And that usually requires getting professional help, whether that's therapy, group therapy. What I often recommend if people can't afford therapy is to check out Al-Anon or Coda. Because part of this process, especially when you're working with childhood issues, is you're going to need additional support. Codependency recovery is not something I recommend ever doing on your own. It requires a community where you can be heard, seen, you can get the support you need in order to continue the process. Because I've been in recovery for 30 plus years, And I don't imagine I'm ever going to graduate. I am going to be codependent, recovering for the rest of my life. And I've accepted that. And that's part of the process too, is to understand that these tendencies don't necessarily stop or go away completely, but you can absolutely make significant progress enough to have the relationships and the life you want. Now, the next thing I want you to do is go watch my video on setting boundaries, because that's your next step. Thanks so much.